Good evening, and welcome to Wednesday Night Live at South Highland Presbyterian Church. I'm Larry Michael, the pastor for adult ministries here. Someone asked me what I did, and I said as little as possible. But seriously, we have lots of ministries going on here at South Highland, and we like to think that we're seeking to serve with the passion of Christ to our surrounding area and beyond. God has been so good to us, even during this time of pandemic. And we are certainly glad to have some people who are able to come and be with us tonight in person, as well as those of you who are live streaming. And we especially ask you to say hi to us in some way with a like or a heart during this time. We're just really thrilled to have people from lots of different places that tune in to our worship services and also our Wednesday night presentations. We have various Zoom meetings as well, and next Wednesday, our Wednesday Night Live is going to be a Bible Trivia Zoom. Now, I know y'all are just dying to participate in that, and yes, there will be prizes, so you may want to participate next Wednesday evening at 6:30. This coming Sunday, we are starting a new series in the book of Acts. Dr. Hurley will be leading in that series, and we're looking forward to that blessing as well. We have, again, in-person attendance, and you can make reservations for that, as well as live streaming. Tonight is a very, very special event that we are able to host and welcome Dolores Hydock. I think I first heard Dolores as a storyteller at Aldridge Gardens some years ago. My wife took me. It was love stories, and near Valentine's Day, and I guess I've fallen in love with her ever since in her storytelling. She is a world-class storyteller, and is often featured at the International Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. Now, that's a very small town, but every year, until last year, 10,000 people descend on that little town on a weekend to hear storytellers from all over the nation, and yes, from other parts of the world. And I know that Dolores has been featured there many times, as well as other places that she has told her stories. And you know, she goes out to Kirkwood on the River here in Birmingham and reads and does stories there, as well as I think the Hoover Senior, or the library, whatever. And anyway, she's been here a number of times. Several years ago on Ash Wednesday, she led us in the Faces of Jesus, which was a beautiful presentation. But we thought that tonight it would be good, since we have had to face so many serious things this past year, that tonight we would have a lighthearted presentation with some humor, probably some challenges as well. I would like to read to you a description of Dolores that is on her website at storypower.org. And Dolores often calls the things on her website as shameless promotion, but it's all true. This is what someone wrote. Dolores talks with her hands, her elbows, her shoulders. When she speaks, she is literally irrepressible. I like that word. That's how one reviewer described Dolores' vivacious style that fills the stage with wit, energy, and a swirl of characters that populate the stories of family fireworks, food fads, true love, turnip greens, and other peculiarities of everyday life. Her award-winning personal stories, oral histories, medieval adventures, and traditional tales are, as one reviewer said, smart but not cynical, heartwarming yet never corny, traditional without being mundane, a neat feat. So tonight, we're going to welcome Dolores, and at the end of it, we'll have a little bit of Q&A. Looking forward to finding out a little bit more about her. But now we welcome Dolores Hydock, who's going to share with us Dishing the Dirt, or something like that. Here she comes. Welcome her.
here. I warn you, it is true, I talk with my hands and my elbows and my shoulders, except that for the past 14 months, I've been restricted to doing Zoom. And so I've had to sit on my hands, because I don't know how many of you do Zoom, but if you do, you know that you get this, there's this little box, and the camera auto-focuses on you, or at least the way I set it up. And every time I would gesture, it would go out of focus, because it would suddenly focus on my hand instead of my face, and I had to learn to sit on my hands. And so tonight is really one of the very few times I've been let out of the box, let out of the cage in over a year. So we'll just see what happens. I don't know if I can actually move. It's going to be so strange. But thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for the invitation, Larry. I appreciate the chance to be here again. Thanks to John for giving us sound and lights back there. And thank you to all of you who are live streaming and joining us that way. I don't know how you feel about it, but I am really, really mad at COVID-19.
Amen.
It made me do something I did not want to do. It made me give up all my illusions about everything I would accomplish if I just had the time. I had the time. I had plenty of time. And I still did not learn to speak Italian. I still did not digitize those shoeboxes full of black and white photos from the 1960s. It has been, what, 14 months now? I still have not vacuumed underneath my refrigerator. But I have spent a lot of time in my garden. And what I've discovered is that I get something essential from my garden. How many of you are gardeners? Gardeners? Yeah, gardeners. I don't know what you get out of your garden, but I've discovered I get something very important. It is not vegetables for my dinner table or salad ingredients, certainly not that. It is not fresh flowers for the vases on my dining room table. It is not even the vitamin D and the exercise. The essential thing I get from my garden is some personal insight, a little glimpse into myself that I probably would not get any other way. And these two stories will tell you what I mean. It was a Tuesday in late April, a few years ago. The phone rang. I picked it up, answered it. I didn't recognize the voice at the other end of the line. The woman introduced herself, said that she was the chair of the City of Irondale Beautification Board. Congratulations, she said. You've won a City of Irondale Beautification Board award. And I thought, what kind of a scam call is this? I mean, the only way I ever figured I was going to get an award for beautifying my neighborhood was by moving out. But she seemed to be serious. Of course, later on, what I found out is that she still had one of those beautification board signs in her garage, and she could not resign as chair of the committee until she gave it away. Whatever the reason, the next morning there appeared in my front yard this elegant black wrought iron sign with scrolly white lettering. And I looked at that sign and I thought, well, okay. That makes it official. I have officially become Mrs. Nash. 7:30 of a summer evening, Reading, Pennsylvania, 1960-something. The two chairs on our front porch would have been dusted off earlier that morning, wiped clean of that thin layer of brown dust that would have settled overnight from last night's softball game in the field across the street. Those two chairs on our front porch were not Southern-style wooden rocking chairs. They were those metal squared-off chairs, you know the ones I mean, they kind of bounce when you sit in them, and they have a kind of crisscross pattern on the seat that leaves this basket weave design on your legs when you sit in them in Bermuda shorts. Those two chairs looked out over a curved black wrought iron railing that looked out over a sidewalk where a hopscotch board had been scratched out in pale blue chalk. Next to our front door was a small silver insulated box with black block lettering. The letters said St. Lawrence Dairy. And twice a week, 2-quart bottles of whole milk were left in that little silver box. You know those glass bottles with the pleated paper caps on the top? And if somehow you ran out of milk in between deliveries, you could run down to the gas station at the corner where a vending machine spat out a waxy quart carton of milk for 27 cents. The machine took pennies. By 7:30 of a summer evening, Mrs. Nash would usually already be sitting on her front porch, the one right next to ours. You always knew if Mrs. Nash was out there, because as soon as you opened our front door, a cloud of her lily-of-the-valley perfume would come wafting across, engulf you in this fog of fragrance. And you would look over, and there she would be, sitting in one of the white wicker chairs that furnished her front porch. She'd be sitting there wearing a flowered house dress, a necklace of huge white beads the size of marbles, those open-toed, chunky-heeled, lace-up shoes that she polished with that drippy, liquidy white shoe polish. You remember that stuff? You probably polished your saddle shoes with it. She would sit there smiling out across the sidewalk, across the street to the ball field on the other side. It was the one moment of rest in her day. Mrs. Nash worked at Chauffeur's Bakery in downtown Reading, rolling out pie crusts and cookie dough and drizzling a thin, sweet white glaze onto the bear claws and raspberry Danish and cinnamon rolls that she sometimes brought home to share with us. Her 8-hour shift started at 4 in the morning, and when she got home a little after noon, she had to look after a house and a husband, the mysterious Mr. Nash, whom we never saw. And then whatever time or energy she had left, she would spend in her garden. She would trade out her bakery hairnet for a big straw hat, and there she would be, weeding, feeding, spraying, fertilizing, mulching, talking. We never knew if she was talking to herself or talking to the plants or talking to the invisible Mr. Nash, but she was always out there, taking all the years that it took me and my 2 sisters next door to grow up to transform the space behind her house into a prize-winning garden with swooping shrub beds full of lilacs and lilies and old-fashioned roses. You know the ones I mean, the ones with those droopy blossoms that flopped on thin stems, petals curled up like cabbage leaves, so fragrant, one blossom could perfume an entire room. I remember sometimes when I was little, 7, 8 years old, I'd be playing in our backyard. Mrs. Nash would summon me to our shared backyard fence. She would give me a handful of those roses, the thin stems wrapped in wax paper. Give these roses to your mother, dear. And I would stagger inside, woozy from the combined aroma of old roses and old Mrs. Nash. Many, many years later, when I learned that she had died at the age of 84, I realized she must have been about 50 at the time. But to my 8-year-old eyes, she looked like she had to be 100 years old as a person could possibly be. The other kids in the neighborhood just called her the old lady with the garden. Hers was the only house on the block that didn't have any children. And most of the time, Mrs. Nash was sweet and soft-spoken unless somebody messed with her yard. She hated it when the neighborhood boys would take a diagonal shortcut running from the alley behind, across her yard, across the street to the ball field on the other side. Most of the time, they only ever did it when they thought she wasn't looking, but sometimes she'd see him. She'd see him through her kitchen window. She'd come out, that screen door would slam behind her. She'd come out, she'd point that finger, she'd say, "You boys, what are you doing running like that? You could fall and hurt yourself. You walk on the sidewalk." And maybe she really was concerned somebody might get hurt, but we always figured she just didn't want anybody messing with her yard. The yard where she worked so hard. The yard that finally, the year I graduated from high school, finally won her a Neighborhood Beautification Board Award. A green and white sign that said, "Great Gardens for a Growing Community." A sign that she proudly displayed in a little flower bed full of begonias and petunias right in front of her house. Our backyard, next door, was not like Mrs. Nash's backyard. Behind our house, there was a 5-foot by 15-foot patch of dirt edged with a low concrete rim. We called that the garden. No self-respecting Southern gardener would have called it a garden, but it was a garden to us. It bloomed purple and pink in the springtime with hyacinths. In the summer, my dad planted early girl tomatoes and King Arthur bell peppers. One autumn, it was completely taken over with castor bean plants grown for my sister Alice's 10th grade science fair project. Castor bean plants, highly poisonous plants that grew to be 10 feet tall and would not die, no matter what Alice did to them in her search for a better understanding of the effect of soil pH variation on the growth of plants in this community. In addition to the garden, there was a detached garage and lots of room for kids to play. My parents grew children. Mrs. Nash grew a garden. I figured I wasn't ever going to grow either one. As my life followed its little path, no children, no gardens, a lifetime of living in apartments and condominiums with nothing more complicated to care for than a couple of silk chiffaleras from Hobby Lobby. And then one day, about 25 years ago, some impulse in me wanted to get rooted. And so I sold my 8th floor condominium on Highland Avenue. I think it's that direction to the Highland Plaza. And I bought an almost 100-year-old brownstone house in Irondale. 4 blocks from the Irondale Cafe. If I stand outside and the wind is just right, I can smell those fried green tomatoes. That house has a breezy front porch and a shady back porch. It has wavy glass windows that let in lots of light. It has electrical outlets artistically arranged right in the middle of the plaster walls. And it has not a single squared off right angle. Everything tilts one way or the other. I know once I was in the kitchen making breakfast. I was putting some blueberries on my cereal. Some of the berries got away from me. They fell to the floor. They rolled up under the refrigerator. And as I was standing there thinking, how am I going to retrieve them? They rolled back out. The house sits on almost a half acre of land that at one time or another has been home to hybrid tea roses, muscadine vines, 10-foot tall gardenia bushes, 16 kinds of conifers, and a flock of brassy orange daylilies that propagate like rabbits. It's also home to a terrorist cell of squirrels and a family of slugs, each of which is the size of a cheap cigar. I moved into that house in November of that year, all those years ago. November, when all of that vegetation was just sort of tan. I mean, you know what yards look like here in Alabama. They're not green, they're not white with snow, they're sort of tan. And I really didn't give much thought to what I was going to do with all of that. Maybe I would pave it, turn it into a badminton court. And then one day, just about 2 weeks after I moved in, mid-November, week before Thanksgiving, I was heading out to my car, and right next to the driveway, there's a little shrub bed. And in that shrub bed was a rose, a deeply fragrant rose with petals the color and texture of a theater curtain, blooming next to a concrete driveway in November. And the strength and determination and unnecessary beauty of that rose blooming seduced me into trying my hand at gardening. Well, that and my French yard man, Frederic. It was February, 1st February, I was in that house. It was a Saturday morning. I remember I was in the kitchen finishing my coffee, reading the paper. That's how long ago it was. There was a Saturday Birmingham News. I'm in the kitchen, I see this white truck pull into the driveway. This swarthy young man gets out. Looks to be mid-30s, wavy dark brown hair, Saturday morning stubble of a beard, dark brown eyes, 4-inch long eyelashes that dust the top of his cheekbones. He knocked on the back door, said, "My name is Frederic. I know this yard. It is a big yard. And in July and August, it is a jungle." He gestured toward the tan expanse behind him. I noticed he was missing 2 fingers from his right hand. I did not want to know how he'd lost them or where they were currently composting. "I used to take care of this yard for the people who live here before you. You want me to take care of you too?" The answer to that would be yes, oui. And so began my collaboration with Frederic, who turned out to be as much philosopher as yardman. Because it seems like every time he left, he would leave me not just with the grass mowed and the edges trimmed, he would leave me with some useful bit of life wisdom that just might come in handy somewhere along the way. For instance, he taught me to pace myself. "Dolores," he would say, "Dolores, nothing is in full bloom all the time." He taught me to trust the process. He would say, "Dolores, in the winter, when everything above the ground looks brown and dead, no, below, where you cannot see, the roots are growing." He taught me to be realistic. "Dolores, they are perennial, not immortal." We talked a lot about weeds. I would say to him, "Frederic, we fight and fight and fight these weeds. They keep coming back. We're never going to be able to get rid of them." And he would say, "Dolores, you fight the weeds for the same reason you fight wickedness and evil and stupidity in this world. You fight them not because you think you can get rid of them. You fight them to slow them down." Well, my life lessons from Frederic came to an end all too soon when he got married and moved off to Sylacauga with his new wife, Kim. But I think about Frederic every February when the forsythia bursts into bloom, because that's when he would come to me and say, "Dolores, it is time to put the pre-emergency on the lawn." And I would think, pre-emergency, what a great idea. Wouldn't it be wonderful? You could go to Home Depot, buy some pre-emergency granules, sprinkle them on your life, avert disaster before it strikes. Well, in the 25 years now that I've owned that garden, or that garden has owned me, I have spent countless hours out there weeding, feeding, fertilizing, mulching, spraying, talking. It's where I practice my stories, my lines to plays, declaiming to the daffodils, preaching to the pomegranates. I'm usually out there in a big straw hat, T-shirt that I got from the Red Cross. It says, "Starve a mosquito, give blood." Well, one Saturday, not long after that beautification board sign appeared in my front yard, I was working way in the back of the yard. And a car pulled up on the street alongside, stopped, the window rolled down. This man leaned out. I didn't know him. He looked, I don't know, maybe about my age. He introduced himself. He said, I just wanted to say congratulations on getting that Beautification Board Award. That's really great. He said, I know you work really hard in this yard. In fact, you sure do remind me of old Miss Coker. She lived in this house when I was a kid growing up in this neighborhood, and she was always out here. I mean, man, she must have been about 100 years old, but she was always out here working, big straw hat on, talking to herself. We all thought she was crazy, but you sure do remind me of her. And then he drove away, leaving me standing there looking for a compost pile I could dive onto and die on. Well, later that afternoon, I cleaned up, I went inside, cleaned up, making myself a sandwich. I'm in the kitchen. Something went whooshing past the kitchen window. What was that? I ran out. Too late. I didn't see anything. A couple days later, about the same time of day, again I'm in the kitchen. Again, something goes flying past the window. I was quicker this time. I was out there, that screen door slammed behind me. It was Michael, the 9-year-old kid who lives across the street from me, tearing through the yard, taking a diagonal shortcut from the alley behind, across my yard, past the pomegranate, over the stone fence, through the daffodils, across the street to his house on the other side. I went out there, I said, "Hey!" I'd done it. I had become Mrs. Nash. Evening, as I like to do on warm spring evenings, I went out to sit on my front porch. Was that Lily of the Valley? No, that was just my Ben Gay. I sat down on the porch swing. I looked around. Across the street, 9-year-old Michael and his 5-year-old sister live with their parents. Catty corner from me, there's a couple of 30-something newlyweds. Next door, Jason and Lauren have just had their 3rd baby. They all call me ma'am. And I know that to them, I look like I am 100 years old as a person could possibly be. And I just have to accept that. But then I looked at that black and white sign, and I thought, I could do worse than to become Mrs. Nash. A strong, hard-working woman, generous with her roses and her cinnamon rolls. A woman who probably already knew something I was just starting to figure out. That being the old lady with the garden is not such a bad role to play. You can talk to yourself in public. You can wear whatever you want. And if you're lucky, your garden and the time you spent there have given you some personal insight, a few life lessons that might come in handy somewhere along the way. Because let's face it, any rose can be beautiful in May, but it takes a strong, deep-rooted, determined, mature rose to keep on blooming right into November. You have no clue how beautiful that sounds. You have no idea how amazing that is. Thank you so much for that. Real people, real people. Well, there's another life lesson, another bit of personal insight that I got from my garden. This one also happened just a few years ago. It was a Saturday in early March. One of those Saturdays in early March that we often have here in Birmingham, when the sun has finally come out after a long, bleak, gray, miserable February, and you cannot bear to be indoors one more minute. I had work to do emails, files to deal with. But my laptop would let me take all of that outside. So I gathered up my computer and my glasses and pens and papers and headed out to work at the little black wrought iron table there on my back porch. First, though, I just had to put everything down and just walk through the yard. You know what that feels like. You feel that sun on your face and neck and shoulders. Everything's so gorgeous. The pear trees, the plum trees, profusely in bloom. Tulip magnolia blossoms. Oh my gosh, look at that blue ice cypress. It must have grown 3 feet over the winter. I remember how tiny it was when it first went in the ground years ago. A housewarming gift from my friend Linda, who knew when I moved into that house, I needed trees more than I needed a toaster. In fact, as I look around the yard, I realize how many things there are gifts from people. There's the coral azalea from my friend Marie. There's the angel face rose from Carl. There's all the Japanese maples that my friend David grafted and grew and gave to me, helped me plant, dug big holes, brought in sacks and sacks and sacks of mulch and topsoil. There's the curved concrete bench my mother gave me when I moved into that house. I can picture her sitting on that bench when she would come to visit me. She'd sit there smiling up at that bird that she swore sang a song, sounded just like it was calling my dad's name. Peter, 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 Peter. I hear hammering next door. It's my neighbor, Jason. He's building a fence around his backyard, a fence made of those long wooden posts rounded on top. It kind of looked like giant popsicle sticks. When he started the project weeks ago, I asked him, are you walling things in or walling things out? Oh, he said, just trying to keep the kids and dogs from running off. He has one more side to finish, the side that divides his yard from mine. Adam is helping him. Adam is another neighbor, lives further down the street. Adam and Jason, they do a lot together. They have a lot in common. They're both in their 30s. They're both dads. Jason has 3 children, Adam has 2. In fact, they're not just both dads, they're both dads of newborns. Allison is 3 months old. Little baby Wren just showed up 2 weeks ago. I head over their way, I say, hey, how are you guys doing? Are those little ones letting you get any sleep? Oh, not so much, Jason says. I've been up since 4 this morning. 4, Adam says, you lucky dog. Wren started crying at 2 a.m. I never was able to go back to sleep. I say, so between the 2 of you, you don't have 9 solid hours of sleep and you're out here with chainsaws and power tools? Jason holds up a bright green soft drink can. We're fueled by Mountain Dew and sunshine. Lauren, Jason's wife, comes out the back door of their house, cradling 3-month-old baby Allison in her arms. Their 2 little boys, aged 4 and 6, carve figure 8s in and around her legs before they run up to the back of the yard to inspect the chicken coop with the 2 chickens that they have named Monkey and Juice. Tiny white cloth diapers flutter from a clothesline that stands next to a rainwater collection tank that feeds into a raised vegetable bed. You can still see the green tops of carrots and kale from the winter vegetable garden. Lauren makes her own yogurt. April, Adam's wife and mother of their 2 children, April does not make her own yogurt. April kind of relies on Huggies and Happy Meals and hopes for the best. April is trudging up the hill on the other side of my house. She is trying to keep up with their 2-year-old daughter, Lark. That's her name, Lark. Lark is running up the hill, scaring the cat, bending over to sniff at a tulip that has no smell. Then she plops down right in the middle of the street so she can examine an excellent rock she found there. April has 2-week-old baby Wren with her. Wren, that's his name. She has him in a snuggly so she can hold him close. I haven't seen the newborn yet, so she brings him over for me to admire. His little face is so red and fierce, those eyes squinted shut. He looks like a miniature Mr. Magoo. And as I look at that tiny, determined face, I think, this child will probably see the 22nd century. He'll be in his 80s when the calendar flips to the year 2100. He'll probably make it. And it's so strange to think I'm looking at a child who will look at a world I will never see. April takes off running, trying to intercept Lark as she turns down an alleyway, chasing a bee. I go sit down at the table, flip open the laptop. The cat jumps in my lap, insists on having his head scratched, demands the undivided attention he so richly deserves. Then he hops over to the other chair, circles the green and white striped cushion twice. Then he flops down, curls up, a fuzzy gray igloo that rises and falls as he drifts off to sleep. I hear children laughing, calling out as they ride their bikes up and down the street, their high voices harmonizing with the notes of Scott Joplin's The Entertainer. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, played over and over by the ice cream truck that roams through the neighborhood. I hear Adam and Jason next door. Hey, this next one needs to be exactly 5 feet 10 inches. That last one fit. Oh, not so much. Darn, it reminds me of that dumb joke. The guy says, oh, this stupid board, I keep cutting it and cutting it, it's still too short. They laugh. The Mountain Dew is kicking in. Ordinarily, Lance would be helping them with the fence project. Lance is the 30-something single guy who lives on the other side of me. Lance, Adam, Jason, they do a lot together. But today, Lance is busy. Lance is getting ready for a cookout he's having later that evening in his backyard for some friends. And so Lance is marinating. Lance is a wonderful cook. His vanity license plate says chutney. So Lance is cleaning his house and setting up folding tables and chairs in his backyard. And while he works, he is listening to the Doors' greatest hits. A guy in his 30s listening to a rock band from the 60s. Come on, baby, light my fire. He has got it cranked up really loud so he can hear it outside. And I can hear it too. It comes pouring out through the screen door, through the sunshine, across the street, over to my back porch. And that husky Jim Morrison voice and familiar keyboard riff, take me back. Back across time, back across geography, back to another Saturday, a gray, drizzly September Saturday. I am in my bedroom in my parents' house in Reading, Pennsylvania. I am 19 years old, and I love the Doors. I'm ready to light somebody's fire. I'm ready to have my fire lit too. Come on, baby, light my fire. The song swirls out of my stereo as I sing along and stuff the last few items into the small black suitcase that will accompany me for the next 12 months. It's the September after the summer, after my sophomore year of college, and my college roommate, Julie McSweeney, and I are heading off to Europe for a year. We had been students at George Washington University in downtown Washington, D.C., an urban campus 4 blocks from the White House. And sophomore year, freshman year had been so crazy. March on Washington, student protests against the war in Vietnam, Cambodia, student strikes, tear gas in the streets. It had been so confusing, not just politically, but academically too. In 4 semesters, Julie and I, between the two of us, had burned through 6 different majors. I started out in political science, moved on to pre-med, ended up in theater and drama. Julie went from mathematics to sociology to modern dance. We both had to admit we didn't have a clue what we were doing. So we decided we'd stop, take a break, travel, see the world, find ourselves, figure it out along the way, armed with 2 semesters of French, 2 semesters of German, and 2 19-year-olds' sense of invincibility. We were heading off to Europe for a year, following a man. A man who had seduced us both. A man who made promises we both believed. A man named Arthur. Arthur Frommer, who told us we could do it on $5 a day. I do not remember the conversation where I told my mother about my plan. I don't remember telling her that I was quitting school, giving up my scholarship. Julie and I were going to fly to Frankfurt, Germany, buy a used VW Beetle, drive around Europe for a year. I don't remember telling her that, but I must have. I do remember that I never had that conversation with my dad. My mother cleared the whole thing with him. He and I never once spoke about where I was going, what I was doing, until that gray, drizzly September Saturday. Come on, baby, light my fire. The Doors revolved through the final chorus of that song as I switched off the stereo, shut the lid, picked up the suitcase, took it downstairs. My dad slung the suitcase into the trunk of the gray Chevy Caprice Classic, and the 3 of us, my mom, my dad, and me, headed off down I-95 to Dulles International Airport, where I would meet up with Julie, and off we would go. We were all 3 of us pretty quiet on that 3-hour drive. Even my mother. I mean, my mother always talked on car trips. She'd read out the billboards if she couldn't think of something else to say, but even she was quiet. We got to about 20 miles outside the airport. My dad caught my eye in the rearview mirror. He said, "Schluggo, you're going over there, and you think you're going to find a better way to live. But I think what you're going to find is that everything you really want is in your own backyard." And that's all he said. Looked away. Asked my mom to check the exit number. 15 minutes later, we were at the terminal. There was Julie. The adventure began. What was he talking about? There were worlds to see, people to meet, life to be lived, adventures to be had. I didn't know what he meant that day. I didn't know what he meant that year. I didn't know what he meant for years to come as my life followed its little path, twisted, unfolded. I don't think I really understood what he meant until that warm, sunny March Saturday morning, sitting there on my back porch, sun shining, the birds singing, the flowers blooming, the neighbors hammering, the kids laughing, the cat purring, the computer humming, the grill smoking. I have a sweet house, a safe place to live. I have work I love to do, and people like you who let me do it. I'm surrounded by gifts that remind me there are people in this world who somehow love me. I have good neighbors who protect their families and feed their friends and believe enough in this tired old world to bring determined little babies into it. I have a cat who helps me keep things in perspective, reminds me daily I am not the center of the universe. Home, work, family, friends, hope that the world will be okay, that there are people coming along behind me who will, one way or another, try to figure it out. I finally get it. My dad was right. Everything I really want is in my own backyard. Thanks for letting me be in your backyard tonight. It's been wonderful to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to record that, and then after I do a Zoom meeting, I'm going to play it back to myself. It's great.
Thank you so much for coming out to be with us tonight.
Sure.
You've reminded us of positive things that came from the pandemic.
Yeah, there were some things.
We're all still learning along the way.
Yeah.
Now, you grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Reading, Pennsylvania, home of the Reading Railroad and Ludum's Cough Drops.
That's right.
That's what Reading's famous for. You remember Monopoly, Reading Railroad, right? How many of you thought it was the Reading Railroad?
That's right, yeah.
Reading. It's named after Reading, England, which was the birthplace of William Penn. That's how we got our name. So it's Reading, England.
Who has a connection to Pennsylvania?
A little slight connection to Pennsylvania, that's right.
Now, your first story was told when you were about 5 years old.
That's right.
Can you still tell it?
I actually can. It's called Clever Gretel. I won't tell it to you. But remember I told you about the park across the street where they had softball? There were softball fields in one half. It was a city block square. And the first half was softball fields, and then it was a playground. And in the summertime, the city of Reading hired what they called teachers. They were college students, usually education majors, to come and implement a 10-week program of planned activities at the playground. There were 44 of these playgrounds all over the city. We never went to summer camp. We went to the playground. And there were games, and there were crafts, and there were contests. And one of the contests was a storytelling contest. And you competed in your age group. And I remember at the age of 5, I told the story, Clever Gretel. And I won a blue ribbon. But I think the fact is, I was the only person in my age group competing. So I think that kind of helped. But man, that set me off. That was it.
That's awesome. Well, obviously, that was the start of a long career that took a lot of other twists and turns along the way.
That's
right. Your background is colorful, all the different jobs you've had. And,
can't hold a job. That's the problem.
Au pair and Paris and all the different, it's amazing. Yeah. Now, at 14, you played the Statue of Liberty. I
did. This was one of the things that the playground had was at the end of the year was a pageant. It was a play, and the poor person who was the head of the recreation department had to come up with a play, you can imagine, for about 400 or 500 kids, where everybody could have a part. And so that particular year was Salute to America, and I got to be the Statue of Liberty. I was draped in these bed sheets, and I had this electrified crown on and an electrified torch, and there was a lily pond in front of the band shell in City Park, and they floated me out on floats out onto the middle of this with this electrified torch and electrified crown. I mean, it's a wonder I'm here to tell you this story today, but I survived it, so that was good.
So were you just like, you didn't move?
That's right. No, I was just, the Statue of Liberty. Now, another memorable year, I was the Pied Piper of Hamlin. And that was, I got to wear green tights and a green sawtooth-edged tunic and a cap with a feather in it. I tell people I looked like the love child of Robin Hood and the Keebler Elf. That was another memorable role.
Oh, man, that's awesome. So, I mean, the Statue of Liberty was kind of like the kickoff for the college major that would end up being in theater?
Well, as I said, I started in political science because I thought I was going to, that's why I went to George Washington in D.C. I thought I was going to major in political science, learn to speak 5 languages, and work for the State Department. And then I moved to pre-med, and then I got cast in a play, and so maybe I'll be a theater major, and that's when I had to just stop. It was like, what's going to be next? But theater was always a love of mine, but I decided I was never going to be able to make a living at it. But Larry, you mentioned earlier that I go out to Kirkwood by the river and have been going out there since 1987, once a month to read or tell stories. And that place has such a special place in my heart because when I was working for IBM, selling, you know, computers the size of this room that had about the power of a Fitbit, I really wanted to perform. That itch wanted to be scratched, but I didn't have time to be even in a community theater play. And so I called up Kirkwood by the River, and I said, it was the predecessor to Janet. It was Eileen Bostic. And I said, would it be okay if I came out and read stories to your residents once a month? Yeah, sure, come on. And people there, residents there, belonged to literary clubs and garden clubs and book clubs and invited me to come and do a program for them. I had no idea this existed. I had no idea that I'm a Yankee, remember, so we didn't have any of these kind of things. And so I started going to these literary and book clubs. And of course, if any of you have ever been a member of those clubs, you have to have 9 programs a year. And so people trade your name around, And so my name got passed around, and that's where it began. And that's where I realized people will sit still and listen while you tell a story? Really? How great is that? And then, that's where it began. So Kirkwood by the River has a very special place in my heart.
That's awesome.
Because of that.
Well, I've been to the Storytelling Festival a number of times in Jonesboro, and I always felt that you were among the best there. And I remember hearing In Her Own Fashion, I believe, you did there. 90 minutes?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about total recall, that she was able to remember, and that beautiful story about...
Yeah, the story about Ninette Griffith. She was the head of fashion at Loveman's in downtown Birmingham back in the 50s and 60s. And when she was 95 and 96 years old, I got to interview her and hear her story. And then I made that into a one-woman play, long story, where I'm both me, awkward Yankee interviewer, and Ninette, perfect Southern lady, telling her story. And I'm actually going to get to do that show in Union Springs, Alabama. Do any of you know where Bullitt County? Yeah. The Bullitt County Department of Tourism has a little theater, the Red Door Theater. It's hosted in a big Deerfield Farms down there right now. And I'm going to be there for a whole weekend doing that play. So if you know people down in Bullitt County, I'll send the info to Larry and he can get it to you. But there'll be 4 shows of it. I'd love for people to come see it.
That's wonderful. Although I think maybe my favorite is Becoming Dr. Ruth.
Oh, well, that's fun. It's a fun story.
That was I heard at the Storytelling Festival. And although you're a little bit taller than she is, and didn't she actually come to your performance?
Yes. I got to do a play. It was a terrific new theater in 2015 called Becoming Dr. Ruth. And it was the backstory of how she got to be Dr. Ruth. It wasn't her at the height of her fame. It was the incredible story of how her life came together. And somebody said, well, are you going to invite her to come? And I said, no, I'm not going to call Dr. Ruth. Why not? So they kind of dared me to do it. So I called her up, and she actually came to see the show. And so one night, they took her, the board members of the theater took her to dinner at Bottega, and then brought her to the theater, and the lights come up, and I walk out, and there she is, all 4'7" of her. And the director had me sit a lot. So it wasn't quite so obvious that I'm, a head taller than she is. So I sat a lot for the show. But she was very, very gracious. And then later, I went up to New York and got in touch with her and had dinner with her. And that's another story that I tell about that encounter with her.
Can you just do a little Dr. Ruth for us?
Well, I'll tell you, I was at a storytelling festival in southwestern Virginia. I had called to invite her to come to see the show. Couldn't do it. She had way too much on her plate. She couldn't, no. I get to Fincastle, Virginia, and I want to check messages. And you can't, it's in the Blue Ridge Mountains. You can't get a signal anywhere. So I'm out, I go outside, I'm in the middle of this field, and I check my messages at home. And there's a message on my machine that says, hello, Dolores. This is Dr. Ruth K. Westheimer. I wanted to let you know that I can be there on Friday, June 12th to see the play. Call Pierre. He will give you all the details. Bye-bye. I still have that message on my machine. But she did. Then she came.
When you create a story, and I know that there's an evolution that goes on in your mind, and an inception, the idea that begins to take root and bloom. Right. How long would it take typically for you to develop a story, say like tonight, what you did tonight?
Well, this isn't a cop-out. It really, it's all over the place. There's one story, some of you have heard, called Footprint on the Sky, which is about the story of me coming to Alabama and living on Chandler Mountain. And it took me 25 years to figure out how to take an academic paper that was reporting on that experience, because it was a college project, 25 years to figure out where's the story in it. And then something like My Backyard, I had been thinking and thinking and thinking about my dad saying that to me. I mean, because that stayed with me, and that was a long time ago. And then that day that I was sitting out in my yard, it was just sort of like, like the sky opened up, like in the Bible scenes, where you see the rays coming down. It was like touched by an angel or something. And that one came together really fast, but it was 40 years in the percolating, but then the story came together. Once I got the connection, then it was really fast. I will say this pandemic year, I thought was going to be such a creative year. Oh man, I got all kinds of, no. I think I wrote 3 stories that I feel like I can tell. The rest is so depressed and downbeat, and that it just wasn't a source of inspiration. I'm just hoping that what we all just had to do is just had to change and adapt to what the pandemic did to us and to our lives. And then I'm hoping maybe next year, as I reflect back on it, then maybe the stories will come.
But just look at what we're grateful for now.
So much to be grateful for.
It's beginning to happen again, and things are opening up. And of course, we have a whole world that is suffering, and people who have suffered and died. And so we continue to learn from it. Well, I'm glad that you came to Alabama.
I'm glad too.
I came to Alabama, and I told Alabamians when I came, I said, I got here as soon as I could.
Yeah, right.
They like that.
Right. It's true.
I'm not leaving.
Yeah, right.
I'm planning to stay.
Yeah, me too.
Well, thank you so much for coming to be with us tonight. Thank you. You blessed us all.
Thank you all.
Well, it's been a wonderful evening, and we thank you all for participating. And I'm going to ask Dr. Hurley, our pastor, if he would lead us in a concluding prayer. If you want to say something about Sunday morning and the new sermon series that's
we're having church
up.
Sunday morning. It's live. You can be here just like you are tonight. We're going to be moving through some of the stories in Acts of how the resurrection message spreads under the power of the Holy Spirit, and how this unlikely gaggle of messengers transformed the Mediterranean and eventually the whole world. So join us either online or here, radio. Can't promise you the kind of stories Dolores tells, but we'll have fun anyway.
Amen.
And a lot of good things. And when I was just looking at the bulletin here in a slow moment, just proofing that, but a lot of good things. Some of y'all probably heard Abby Gatliff yesterday as she received the James Massey Preaching Award at Beeson Divinity School. And it was a beautiful, beautiful sermon she did on Psalm 8 about the creation. And there's also a little thing in here about Daniel Killalay, who's getting ready to head off to Louisville Seminary in the fall, and is still doing a lot of, as Brad said, he's going to be the most equipped pastor because he's working as a sexton here. He's been our youth director. He's our techie guy. So he's doing it all. So anyway, lots of neat things that are going on in spite of the pandemic. Oh, and next Monday, the first live meeting of the session and deacons and trustees is going to be right here. So,
Amen.
If that applies to you, come join us, and we will be broadcasting that for the other some officers that can't get in here. But anyway, that's it.
Close us in prayer.
All right, let's pray together. Lord God, we give thanks for the great story that you have revealed to us in the love that you have for us in your Son who was raised for us and gives us fresh energy and hope every day. We thank you that you're with us this night. We remember those who have special needs, those who are ill, those who are coping with some of just the challenges of this particular time. We thank you for Dolores being with us and for the ministry that she's able to have as those stories lift spirits in many different settings. To you be all honor and glory through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.